We know a lot of you are at home right now, so we thought we'd come out here and show you a little bit of the battlefield. Now, what we want to start with is that I think a lot of people are convinced that there's sort of like, you know, the South secedes, there's Fort Sumter, then there's First Manassas, and then there's fighting around Richmond, and then Antietam and Fredericksburg. But a lot of things happen in between. We're going to be focusing on what happens in between the 7 days and battles around Richmond and the Battle of Antietam. So let's go over to Chris White to get into some of this.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. So, as Gary was saying, a lot of people think that we jump from one major battle to the next, and that's not the case in the Civil War. It's a larger, this is a larger playing field. We're going to have battles taking place out west as George McClellan moves his Army of the Potomac down to the peninsula, where we have the fighting up around Williamsburg, Yorktown, and then moving up to Fair Oaks or Seven Pines. Then we'll have Robert E. Lee take over the Army of Northern Virginia. He'll dub it that in early June of 1862, bolster its forces, build fortifications around Richmond, and then on June 25th and into June 26th, he will start striking out from Richmond and engage in what we call the 7 days battles. Even though the Confederates will sustain heavier casualties than the Union Army of the Potomac, and the Army of the Potomac has actually better positioning throughout much of the campaign, George McClellan will time and again pull back closer to the James River. And as he does so, he's giving up the strategic and the operational initiative to Robert E. Lee. At the end of the 7 days battles, Robert E. Lee knows that he has George McClellan in a corner. Abraham Lincoln comes down to the peninsula, talks with George McClellan, trying to figure out what to do. And in the meantime, Robert E. Lee, who feels that Richmond is always safer without its defenders there, meaning that if the Army of Northern Virginia is not there, the Army of the Potomac's probably not there, he decides to send Stonewall Jackson and A.P. Hill up towards Culpeper, Virginia. As they go up towards Culpeper, what they will do is engage with a new Union Army, known as the Army of Virginia. It's commanded by John Pope, who had come in from the Western Theater. He fought at a place called Island Number 10 and out at Corinth and some other places out west. Seems to have done well, comes into the Eastern Theater, does not ingratiate himself to the Eastern Theater very well. He's known as a miscreant Pope to Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson and Hill move up towards the north to take the fight away from Richmond. There'll be a battle at Cedar Mountain on August 9th of 1862. It's a close-fought thing. Stonewall Jackson wins a victory, and then he pushes further north up towards Manassas and Centerville. This will start to threaten Washington. This will also hopefully start drawing Pope away from Richmond, as well as George McClellan's Army of the Potomac, start drawing them away from the Confederate capital. And at the same time, Stonewall Jackson hopefully will be able to regain the Northern and Central Virginia territories, gain also supplies, and he hopes to try to engage John Pope's army, destroy that one in peace, and then destroy the Army of the Potomac. Robert E. Lee will march up with James Longstreet's wing of the Army of Northern Virginia, and they will reunite here around Manassas, Virginia. Doug?
Right, so Manassas is a target because it is an important railroad hub for northern railroads. You have several railroads coming into the vicinity here. So on August the 26th, Jackson is going to come seize Manassas Junction, lay waste to its stores. There's even a story about men getting into some whiskey and Stonewall Jackson not being a huge fan, not wanting his men to drink because he himself doesn't drink. Then Jackson finds the unfinished railroad cut for the Manassas Gap Railroad. This is a railroad that is meant to go out from the direction of Washington, D.C., through the Blue Ridge Mountains and into the Shenandoah Valley. The railroad has been stopped. It has not been completed. So there's this massive railroad cut and fills this large man-made embankment that looks like a beautiful defensive position for Stonewall Jackson. He's going to hide his troops there. Meanwhile, John Pope finds that Stonewall Jackson is now in his rear and completely unsupported. So he thinks he has a chance to bag Jackson once and for all. And he's going to go all in with the Army of Virginia to try and capture Jackson. Unbeknownst to him, James Longstreet is coming up behind him, going through the Blue Ridge Mountains. Now, as all of this is going on, there is this interesting backstory going, sort of intrigue happening in the Union Army headquarters. George McClellan and Abraham Lincoln have never really seen eye to eye on anything, and because of his lack of success on the peninsula, Lincoln is going to kind of sideline George McClellan. But he is going to take units from the Army of the Potomac and order them to support John Pope. This is going to cause a whole bunch of chaos in the Union High Command, with men siding against Pope and siding with McClellan, leading historians to wonder whether or not these Army of the Potomac units were doing what they were supposed to have done during the Battle of Second Manassas because of their allegiance to McClellan, which will lead to Fitz-John Porter getting court-martialed and a whole bunch of fun stuff that we're not going to get into right this second.
Oh, man, Doug.
But suffice to say, Pope has Jackson, he thinks, against the wall. And so on the night of August the 28th of 1862, Union troops are going to be marching back towards the direction of Washington along the Warrenton Turnpike, or modern-day US 29, and they're going to see a lone figure riding atop a ridgeline. That lone figure is Stonewall Jackson, and he sees these troops marching across his front. He's going to go back to his commanders and say to his officers, "Gentlemen, bring out your men." And that will begin the fighting at what is called the Bronner Farm. It is going to pit the Stonewall Brigade, Jackson's old troops, against the Iron Brigade, a brand new brigade of Wisconsinites and Indianians fighting against these Virginians of the Stonewall Brigade. They're going to be as close as 75 yards as the sun is going down. It's one of these quintessential, strength on strength slugging fests between these two famous units of the American Civil War, and that's what's going to start the Battle of Second Manassas.
Good. Thanks so much, Doug. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. Good to see so many friends here. I see Dominish Miller. I see John Heckman. Mary Coik. Wow. I think I know you as well, so thanks so much for watching. Make sure you share this with your friends. Make it worthwhile for us to be out here shooting this stuff. And, I'm going to kick this back to Doug in a second because here we are. We're at Second Manassas. It's sort of like the Manassas nobody knows about, right? You know a lot about First Manassas. Second Manassas, if I'm correct, you've got Lee and you've got big wings under Jackson and Longstreet. Jackson is here first. You've got this army that nobody knows about under John Pope, but it's got a lot of the future people. Come back in, Doug. So who would our normal viewers know from Pope's army? We're talking about, oh my God, we're talking about, like, I think what is known as the 12th Corps, maybe the 1st Corps.
Right. So the army of what is called in the summer of 1862 the Army of Virginia, the Northern Army of Virginia, not to be confused with the Army of Northern Virginia, but the Union Army of Virginia is what will eventually become the 1st, 11th, and 12th Corps of the Army of the Potomac. So think of, like I mentioned earlier, the Iron Brigade, the 2nd, 6th, 7th Wisconsin, the 19th Indiana. The Michigan troops have not joined them yet. Also think of the troops that are going to be on Oak Hill at Gettysburg, the 83rd New York, the 16th Maine. Those regiments are also part of the Army of Virginia. Then you have 11th Corps units like the 73rd Ohio, just off the top of my head. Those 11th Corps units that are going to meet with infamy at Chancellorsville and again at Gettysburg. They are also part of Pope's army. Will actually fight here on Chin Ridge. And then what will become the 12th Corps and then later the 20th Corps of the Army of the Potomac and then the Army of the Cumberland is part of the Army of Virginia. They're going to fight primarily at Cedar Mountain, not be engaged here, but that is the group of soldiers that we're thinking about when we think about the Army of Virginia. Those are the ones that are going to be doing a lot of the heavy fighting here.
Okay, good. So I wonder if, we can zoom out for a sec, because we want to talk more about the battle, but I'm going to bring Chris back on without warning him about this. But
Zoom out?
Yeah, no. He's going to go behind me and then come in a circle so we can properly social distance here. I'm just curious if we could zoom out for a second and say, okay, so Doug already brought us up. It's August 28th, 1862. The armies are fighting here, but then all of a sudden, there's going to be 2 more days of fighting. Maybe we could just get into what's going to happen on these next 2 days so we could get into the detail of that afterward. Chris?
Yeah, so what will end up happening is we'll have the fight at Bronner's Farm, also known as Groveton. The Confederates are going to sustain heavy casualties, as will the Union forces. You'll see Dick Ewell lose leg at what they call Kettle Run, but also at the battle here at Bronner's Farm around Groveton. We'll have the Stonewall Brigade taking on the yet-to-be-named Iron Brigade. They'll earn their iron name here in the next campaign, the Maryland campaign. And so we have this battle at Bronner's Farm, and we have John Pope, who now becomes hyper-focused on Stonewall Jackson's wing of the Army of Northern Virginia. He is going to be so focused on Jackson that he's going to forget that moving up towards Thoroughfare Gap, not too far from where we're standing, will be James Longstreet's wing of the Army of Northern Virginia. So as Pope is starting to face his men to the northwest, he is going to face Jackson, who is actually in a role reversal from 1st Manassas. The Union Army came down, swung down from the north during 1st Manassas. Here, the Confederates will hold the north. It'll be a role reversal. They'll hold a place called the Deep Cut, which is a railroad cut, which is actually not a great defensive position like most people think. In some places, it's so deep that the guys can't climb up onto the side of it to shoot over top of it. At other places, it's not graded properly. It's really not a great defensive position, but it is a position that Jackson will take up near Sudley, not too far from where we're standing. And Jackson will be in a defensive position north of the Warrenton Turnpike. Coming up roughly from the south and the east will be the Army of Virginia. As they start to move up into this area, we'll start to get reinforcements from the Army of the Potomac, specifically from the 3rd Army Corps, as well as the 9th Army Corps. The 9th Army Corps is brand new to the Eastern Theater. They had fought down around Roanoke and along the islands of North Carolina. Now they've come up into the Fredericksburg area in July and August and have now been attached to the Army of the Potomac as they move north towards Washington. And the Confederates will start to move more men up towards this area. That'll be James Longstreet's wing. They'll move up towards Thoroughfare Gap, which is not properly defended by the Union forces, and Longstreet's men will start to deploy on Jackson's right flank. Also arriving on the battlefield will be, as Doug talked about, the Union 5th Army Corps, the Army of the Potomac. Fitz-John Porter. Fitz-John Porter is probably the best corps commander on this battlefield. He is definitely the most experienced. His 5th Corps would see a lot of action on the peninsula. Though he is a McClellan man, Fitz-John Porter really is a solid fighter, a solid tactician. He's somebody that you would want on this battlefield. But things will come to blows between him and Pope after this battle as we start to look for some scapegoats. So Pope will start to make attacks up north of the Warrenton Turnpike. He'll start striking with the Union 3rd Corps, the 9th Corps, and part of Robert Milroy's brigade of the Army of Virginia, and they will strike along Jackson's line. And as this is taking place, Robert E. Lee will arrive on the battlefield, as will James Longstreet. Lee, in fact, will come out onto this battlefield, ride up onto the battlefield, and be grazed by a bullet across his face, nearly killed in action. Think about how that would have changed this campaign and the forthcoming campaign up into Maryland. Pope, throughout the day, throughout August 29th, will throw attack after attack against the Army of Northern Virginia, keeping focused on Jackson, while more and more to the west comes James Longstreet's men. Now on the 30th, Robert E. Lee is going to start to close his trap. He will allow Longstreet to come down from Jackson's right flank. Jackson will hold in place while he's absorbing more attacks from John Pope, and James Longstreet's men will roll in here like a juggernaut.
Oh, well, yeah. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. Thanks so much for watching. So thanks for that overview, Chris. We're going to get more into the battle. But beforehand, share this with your friends. I already see people who are resources in themselves, totally on here. Andrew Dalton, thanks for joining us, head of the Adams County Historical Society. That's in Gettysburg, PA. Connie Langham, if you want to know anything about Wilson's Creek, go ahead and ask her. And I can't remember who else just joined that knows a real lot about something else, but I don't want to be rude and look at my phone right now or anything like that. So, I want to make sure that, we were talking about all these weird Army names here. Remember, this is the first, year or two of the Civil War, so we're still trying to figure out what uniforms everybody is wearing. We're still trying to figure out what armies are going to be named after. I mean, I thought the Union armies were all named after rivers or something like that. Well, here, the Union Army is the Army of Virginia. So you've really got all sorts of confusion going on. And even with the names of these battles, we've got, the Battle of Manassas, the Battle of Second Manassas, the Second Battle of Manassas, the Second Battle of Bull Run, and so on. You can come up with about 30 different names for the two battles that are fought here. One story I wanted to get into on the 28th a little bit is because after the Battle of Bronner's Farm, and by the way, if you're interested in this battle, read John Hennessy's Return to Bull Run. Excellent book. I'm seeing some clapping in the background. Maybe there's an emoji for that you can put up there. Excellent book. And one of the stories he tells in there is of a Confederate, and there's an eerie scene on the night of the 28th where sort of lanterns are bobbing up and down as they look for the wounded that might still be scattered on the field at the Battle of Bronner's Farm. And one man hears just the terrible, pitiful wail of a boy, and he recognizes that of his son, and he goes and he finds his own son, and when his son, crying, sees his dad, he says, "No, father, I'm not crying because my leg was shot off." The dad sees his son's leg was shot off. He said, "I'm crying because when my leg was shot off, I tumbled back into this ditch, and there's a hornet's nest in it under my back, and they've been stinging me ever since. Please pull me out. It's just a terrible story. And it's even worse. The son dies in the father's arms, and the father goes on and continues to fight in the Battle of Second Manassas. But it's important to note as we talk about, facts and figures and troops and movements, these things are all about people. I know Doug Ullman loves to talk about this. This is about people, and it's about relationships, these battles, these battlefields. So keep that in mind while you're walking the battlefields, while you're studying them, and while you're social distancing on battlefields. I got to see somebody already has a hashtag for it, social distancing on battlefields. So on the 29th, real quick, just to get into a little bit more detail, Chris talked about it. The 29th consists of fighting with Stonewall Jackson's outnumbered soldiers. I mean, they are pushed to the brink at the deep cut. The Union is advancing attack after attack, but like in the first Battle of Manassas, they are not doing it all at once. It's a brigade or two here, a brigade or two here, and these attacks are sort of made piecemeal against various parts of the Confederate line. The Yankees had no idea how close the Confederates were to breaking. Eventually, they're reduced to throwing rocks. Alabamians are throwing rocks down onto the Union soldiers. It's a real close thing, but right then, James Longstreet is coming up to the area, and that's going to set up a real climactic moment for the 30th.
So on the 29th, as Garry mentioned, it is very close quarters. At one point, the Union Army will break through Jackson's line in the railroad cut, and then A.P. Hill will sweep in and fill the gap. So Pope, on the night of the 29th, thinks that the next day could bring victory to him if he just throws all of his forces in on the field. So he's going to take elements of his Army of Virginia and then reinforce them with John Porter's 5th Corps. The 5th Corps is going to hold on the left flank of this attack formation, and the idea is that the combined force will push through and be able to end Jackson once and for all. Now, on the night of the 29th, there are elements of Porter's 5th Corps that are going to be far out to the west, and they are going to encounter small units of Confederates. One of the commanders over there, Charles Griffin, is going to say that he has encountered Confederates in the west of him, south of Jackson's line, and is going to send up the warning flag. Pope is going to interpret this as coming from a McClellanite, from John Porter's men, basically as an excuse for them not to take part in this attack. There's a whole bunch of controversy that people more intelligent than me can talk about in terms of how Griffin plays into this. But Griffin's brigade, which is one of the better brigades of the Army of Potomac and certainly of the 5th Corps, is not going to take part in the assault on August the 30th. Pope, in the meantime, is going to think nothing of protecting his left flank and is going to leave a small brigade of 2 regiments under Gouverneur K. Warren to protect his left flank. In the meantime, in the early afternoon, he's going to launch a major attack with the rest of the 5th Corps up to the deep cut. And this deep cut, as Garry is sort of walking in the direction of the attack, which he had it right the first time.
Yeah, it's kind of strange.
It's that way. And this is where that famous rock fight is really going to occur. The 5th Corps, along with elements of the 1st Corps of the Army of Virginia, are going to go up this steep embankment of the deep cut, and Jackson's men are going to be out of ammunition and reduced to throwing rocks. There's a famous Don Troiani painting of this scene, and it is one of those paintings that is actually true to life. The deep cut monument, interestingly enough, is still there today. It's one of the earlier monuments on this battlefield, and I'm sure Gary's going to have a picture of it in just a second. My favorite spot on the entire Second Manassas battlefield, and certainly one as you are contemplating social distancing. There ain't a lot of people out there most of the time when I come out to this battlefield. So that's going to happen, and unfortunately Porter is not going to be able to break through. He is pushed back, and it is around that time that Longstreet is going to close the trap.
And here is the deep cut monument that Doug just mentioned. So it looks a lot like the other one on Henry Hill. So these 2 monuments were put up in mid-June of 1865. They are among the first Civil War monuments that are still there. I say among because, man, I don't want you jumping on me about which one is the first one. Superlatives are dangerous in Civil War land here. But you could tell there's a difference. The one on Henry Hill actually has a massive parrot shell on top, rifled shell, whereas this one has stacked cannonballs on top. It's the only way you can tell the difference. I'll also say that first of all, the ones on Henry Hill, if I can find it, it might be a little bit dangerous to look for it right now, but if you can find it, those massive 100-pounder parrot shells were live for 90 years. They sat on a monument on National Park Service land, and they were live. And these are the kind of shells that don't have to hit you. They can disintegrate you if they explode anywhere near you. So those are the real deal. Let me also say that this photo I'm showing is one of only 2 or 3 known photos taken on the Second Manassas battlefield at all. So this is what we have for this battlefield, whereas for the first Battle of Manassas, Manassas. We have a lot. But we can see over toward the Warrenton Turnpike. We can get an idea of what the battlefield looked like in 1865. So these are some of the resources we need to use. Now, before I bring Doug back on here, I have seen a couple other people. Casey DeHaven's on. You want to know about Barnes? You can talk. Okay. Slow down. I'm being told to slow down. I'm getting nice and worked up. It's been a little while since I've been live on camera. Thank you. So Casey, I see she's all into Barnes. You can know about that. I see Ann Mitchell is on. Hey, Ann, if you want to know about ancestry, I see somebody who may or may not know something about Facebook. Tom, it's good to see so many of our friends actually on here. So let me bring Doug back on after I interrupted here to say you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're out on a battlefield practicing social distancing. I hope you all are too. And let me bring Doug back on. Let's kind of wrap this up if we can.
Yeah,
What's going on here?
So this is sort of the real turning point of the Battle of Second Manassas. As I mentioned earlier, only 2 regiments under Gouverneur K. Warren are out, and they're actually going to be over to my left on the far down on the other side of the trees, which you can just see over there, Connor. Behind me in the direction that I'm pointing, those 2 regiments are the 5th and 10th New York. They are both Zouave regiments, outfitted in that gaudy French Algerian style. And Gouverneur K. Warren, as you may remember, is also the man who is credited with saving Little Round Top, or at least bringing the troops over there. This is before then. He is simply a brigade commander in the 5th Corps. Keep in mind that one of his regiments, the 5th New York and the 10th New York as well, but the 5th New York had already had a major bloodletting just 2 months earlier at the Battle of Gaines's Mill. And so it is those 2 regiments that are on the front lines as Jackson's entire wing of the Confederate Army bursts out of the trees. And like good New Yorkers that they are, those 5th and 10th New York Zouaves are going to give the best defense that they possibly can, but they are going to be no match for Jackson's troops. They're going to be pushed back into the ravine of Young's Branch, and it is known by many as the slaughter of the 5th New York. And once that happens, Pope is going to be in scramble mode, trying to get as many troops as he possibly can up onto this piece of land, what is known as Chin Ridge. A number of troops are going to come up into this position. It's going to be a number of... sorry. You haven't...
Talk to the camera.
Yeah, talk to the camera. Sorry. We are losing piecemeal... Union troops are going to be shuffled into this direction to try and stave off this attack, but ultimately they're going to be no match for Longstreet's attack. The guns that you see over in that direction, they're going to be swept over by Confederate troops, and the Union troops are going to be pushed all the way back to Sudley Road, and the attack is only going to end when the Confederates run into members of the U.S. regulars who are basically embedded in Sudley Road, and that is the last line of defense for the Union Army as the battle comes to a close. By then, the sun is beginning to go down, and Pope has realized that he has just suffered a massive defeat at the hands of Robert E. Lee. So the man who said, I come from the West, where we are used to seeing the enemy's backs, is going to have to turn tail and head back towards Washington, ending the Battle of Second Manassas.
Yeah, and just to jump in, Connor, I'll get to you in a second. Just to jump in here, John Pope is managing this battle exactly the way that Irvin McDowell was actually managing the first Battle of Manassas at one point, where he's just putting in piecemeal, one regiment, one brigade, one division at a time, and you'll use up your army very quickly by doing this, by sending them over one at a time. And an ironic twist of fate, as I talked about earlier, the juxtaposition from one year, most of the Union forces that are going to come here to Chin Ridge will come from Henry House Hill, the hill where Stonewall Jackson earned his nom de guerre, Stonewall. So we'll have Union forces coming over to this area. Over where you'll see the cannons today, those are representing Battery E, the 5th Maine light artillery. There would have been 4 guns up here supported by Nathaniel McLean's 4 regiments of Ohioans and some other Union troops, about 1,400 or so Union troops standing up here to take on Nathaniel Shanks Evans, as well as John Bell Hood's men who will come up into this sector. More Union forces will be sent over here, not from McLean's own corps, but from what will become the 1st Corps of the Army of the Potomac. And those will be some of the men who fight, as Doug pointed out, on Oak Ridge or Oak Hill at Gettysburg. We'll have the 12th Massachusetts, the 88th Pennsylvania, who will lose their commander out here, also named McLean, but no relation to the brigade commander. So we'll see a lot of fighting as Union forces are fed in here to slow down Longstreet's advance. Eventually, more and more troops will come in through here. James Kemper's division, who was actually George Pickett's division. Pickett's wounded on the peninsula. And you will also see David Rumph Jones, who will defend the bridge at Antietam, known as the Burnside Bridge. So you see a lot of troops up on here that you'll be familiar with. The Texas Brigade monument's behind me, as well as Fletcher Webster, who is the son of Daniel Webster, Fletcher Webster of the 12th Massachusetts, who's killed up here on Chin Ridge. So what we're seeing is actually a complete role reversal up on top of this ridge. Irwin McDowell, the commander of the Union forces at 1st Manassas, he is actually here sending the troops this way. He's a corps commander here at Manassas in the Army of Virginia. So it all kind of comes full circle time and time again. Connor, you were putting your hand up earlier?
Oh yeah, we had a great question, very relevant. What was the toilet paper situation during this battle?
Toilet paper situation at this point was very dire because the Manassas Junction, the Confederates took what they could, but then burned the rest. So I think the fight over Chin Ridge was really the great toilet paper battle of '62.
Good. Let me hit you with another one then, because and by the way, welcome Amber. I hear I think you said that your hair might be of ponytail length. I want to see that at some point.
Oh, I do too.
Yeah, Doug does too. Okay, so either Doug or Chris, someone could contrast and compare 2nd Manassas Confederate victory with Confederate victory at Chancellorsville. I'll say they're both big battles, and both times the Confederate Army, Lee, went somewhere else. Chris?
It's easy. There's really not a big comparison between the two. 2nd Manassas, the Union Army, portions of the Union Army of the Potomac are roughly handled, as well as the Army of Virginia is very roughly handled and demoralized. They're going to have to fall back to the defenses of Centerville. Then you'll have the Battle of Chantilly, which took place on September 1st, and it will cost the lives of Isaac Stevens as well as Phil Kearny out there. And then you will have a crisis of command, and then you will bring in George McClellan to really take over and reorganize these two armies into one. At Chancellorsville, when Hooker is pushed off the battlefield there, it is him off that field. It is because Joe Hooker gives up that field. And Joe Hooker's army was still in a fighting spirit. They were so upset that they gave up Chancellorsville so easily that they were ready to go back to do battle. And that is the chip on the shoulder that they carry into Pennsylvania when they have the Gettysburg campaign.
That's good. It's so great to see so many of you all. We haven't been live in a little while. And Phil Spoggy, good to see you. And then we got people from Germany, we got people from Ireland, and someone from Dublin, Ohio, that is, Kentucky, California, Oregon. We've been seeing you all over the place. So I'm not sure if we're going to live again today or not, but we appreciate you sharing this with your friends. You can even share it after it ends. But wait, there's more. We have been going crazy trying to tell everybody that we have all this great online content. I suspect some of you out here might only know us through our social media.
Wait, we make videos?
Yes.
Wow, I didn't know we did that.
And you know what we do too? We have maps where you have like one side in red and one side in blue, and they move across the map and it shows how the battle went.
Who would have thunk it?
Yeah, so we have crazy amount of Civil War, Rev War, and 1812 content, and for the Civil War stuff, more than anybody else. So we really we have maps, videos, photos, and we've been increasingly helping people, helping students, helping parents with their students at home, going crazy to use those resources. So go to battlefields.org, zoom back on this Facebook page, or go to Pinterest or whatever social media account that you particularly have. And YouTube, where we have more Civil War videos, I think, than anybody else, and just crossed 10 million views. Thank you, Andy Polton, also behind the camera, and thank you, Connor Townsend. Also before, it looks like we have a last question.
Oh yeah, in fact, for YouTube, if you do want something to take up your time, we count it up, we have 48 hours of content for you. So,
46 are of Garry Adelman.
Yeah, totally.
Wearing this hat. Doug, come on in for a last second.
Okay, so one of the things we talked about before we went live is thinking of 2nd Manassas as this missing link between the peninsula and Antietam. And for a lot of people, they know the Army of the Potomac, they know the fighting at the peninsula, they know the Battle of Antietam, they know what happens there. But for a lot of people, they miss 2nd Manassas, and that's in part because the first Battle of Bull Run is so iconic as the first major land battle. But it really is not to be overlooked, this Battle of 2nd Manassas, because it is Robert E. Lee's victory here that convinces him that it's time to take the war out of Virginia and into Maryland. If that bullet had caught Robert E. Lee in the face on August the 29th, that would never have happened. If John Pope and George McClellan and the Union forces had somehow managed to defeat Jackson or be prepared for Longstreet's assault, there is no way that Robert E. Lee is going to be able to convince Jefferson Davis that now is the time to take the war into Maryland. So the victory here at 2nd Manassas is that pivotal moment, and it really is one of those defining moments for the Army of Northern Virginia. They have essentially won the battles on the peninsula by virtue of McClellan retreating, but here at 2nd Manassas is where you start to develop that yin and yang of Longstreet and Jackson, these the two fists of Robert E. Lee as he is pummeling the Union Army. So it is not to be overlooked. There's a lot of really excellent stories. Garry alluded to one here. There's so much to be learned about Second Manassas. It is not simply a little comma in between the peninsula and Antietam. It is a major battle in its own right and something that deserves study.
Well put.
Yeah, and I'll just close by saying, on my part, that the casualties on this battlefield will be about 13,000 Union casualties, about 9,000 Confederate casualties, and this is what I always look at as the first overland campaign in the Eastern Theater, taking it from the peninsula up to Cedar Mountain, to Second Manassas, and then to Chantilly, and then finally ending it at Antietam. But unfortunately for the Confederate Army, it is going to start the great bloodletting that Robert E. Lee will bring to its army. 92,500 men will start off the 7 days campaigns, and by the time they're done at Antietam, there are about 25 to 27,000 Confederates fit for duty, ready to fight the Army of the Potomac. It is going to be a great bloodletting that is actually going to weaken Lee's army over time, and it will come to a head eventually at Gettysburg.
I can't stress that enough, that all these battles and these campaigns fit into a continuity. In fact, I mean, these bloody battles just string one after the next. These are the same people who survive these battles and go on to fight again, and many of their friends gone. So we really appreciate you watching. Jeff Griffith, Mike Talpacino, I do see you guys. Sorry you came on late. And yes, we did talk about the Wisconsin boys, Jeff. And we really appreciate you joining us. It's so good to see virtually so many of you while you're at home. We may be live later, so keep checking the channel. Go to YouTube. But more than anything else, stay safe. And thank you so much for supporting Battlefield Preservation.